He's the voice behind Go Rest High on That Mountain, a song that has comforted generations in grief. With 22 Grammy Awards and a place among country music's most revered names, Vince Gill built his legacy on honesty, humility, and heart. But few know the private battles he's faced, tragedies that shaped his music and choices that stunned even longtime fans. What he's just revealed adds a new layer to a career defined by quiet strength and unwavering devotion. Surviving loss, the silent tragedy that shaped him. In 1968, Vince Gill was just 11 years old, living a simple, joyful life in Norman, Oklahoma. His days revolved around school, family meals, and the comfort of picking out melodies on his little 4-string tenor guitar. His father, J. Stanley Gill, a federal judge and amateur musician, often played alongside him, nurturing the boy's early love for music. Vince's world was grounded in the unspoken rhythms of a close-knit family, until one shattering phone call changed everything. His older half-brother, Bob Cohen, had been in a car accident. The injuries were catastrophic. Bob fell into a coma that would last for 3 agonizing months. For Vince, who had always looked up to his energetic, free-spirited brother, the hospital became a haunting place of stillness and fear. When Bob finally woke up, he was no longer the same. The accident had left him with severe and permanent brain damage. He could no longer speak, care for himself, or interact with the world in any meaningful way. The boy who used to run through fields with Vince, laughing, teasing, full of mischief, was gone, replaced by a version of himself locked inside an unresponsive body. For young Vince, this was not just a loss. It was a rupture in the emotional fabric of his home. Watching his parents, especially his mother, grieve in silence, trying to accept a living son who was no longer truly there, left a scar that would linger for the rest of his life. Bob remained in this condition for the next 25 years. He passed away in 1993, when Vince was already a celebrated musician. That same year, Vince released Let There Be Peace on Earth, a Christmas album carrying deep emotional weight. One song in particular, It Won't Be the Same This Year, was a direct expression of his grief. The song captured the aching absence of someone once loved, now gone, not only in death but long before, in life. In interviews, Vince has often returned to that period saying, "Every time I sing that song, I see that 11-year-old boy again." That tragedy didn't just mark his childhood. It molded his soul, gave shape to the tenderness in his voice, and gave his songwriting a depth that no fame or fortune could ever fabricate. Walking away, turning down the dream of a lifetime. By the end of the 1980s, Vince Gill was a familiar name in Nashville studios, but not yet a star. He'd played guitar and sung harmonies for Pure Prairie League, even fronting the band for a time, but his solo work was still in search of direction. Signed to RCA Records, Gill released 2 albums, The Things That Matter and The Way Back Home, that were musically solid but commercially quiet. Critics praised his voice. Fellow musicians called him one of the best guitar players around, but the charts remained unmoved. In a city that worshipped hits, he was in danger of becoming one more almost famous story. Then came a phone call that would tempt even the most grounded artist. Mark Knopfler, the legendary frontman of Dire Straits, wanted Vince Gill to join the band. At the time, Dire Straits was one of the biggest rock acts in the world, coming off the global success of Brothers in Arms and stadium tours that sold out within hours. Knopfler had long admired Gill's musicianship, especially his fluid guitar phrasing and the effortless honesty of his vocals. The invitation wasn't just for a session, it was to become a full-fledged member. It was, by all definitions, a golden ticket. Crossover fame, European audiences, arena stages. Most artists would have said yes before the sentence was finished, but Vince hesitated. And then he declined. In a later interview, Gill explained the weight of that decision. "It wasn't that I didn't love what they did. I did, But I knew that once I went down that road, I wouldn't come back. I wouldn't be me anymore. I wanted to tell my stories. I hadn't done that yet. Turning it down wasn't just a professional gamble. It was an existential one. For years afterward, especially in the lean months, he second-guessed himself. The money would have helped. The fame would have opened doors. He played small venues, rode long tour buses, and sometimes stood backstage watching bigger names headline the very shows he opened. But then, in what can only be described as poetic timing, Vince released When I Call Your Name. The album didn't just perform well, it became a defining moment in country music. The title track was a gentle, aching ballad that showcased every ounce of pain and restraint in Gill's voice. It won him his first Grammy and helped catapult him into the mainstream. And with that, his long gamble paid off. He hadn't followed the path to immediate fame. He'd carved his own lane. Looking back, he said the decision to walk away from dire straits wasn't just about career. It was about being honest with myself, he reflected. I'd rather be me at a small club than someone else in a sold-out arena. Loving Loudly, a scandalous romance that defied expectations. In December of 1993, Vince Gill was in Tulsa filming Christmas with Vince Gill, a television special that aimed to blend country warmth with holiday cheer. Producers had lined up a special guest, Amy Grant, the reigning queen of Christian pop. Her presence alone brought star power, but when she walked into the rehearsal room, something entirely different shifted. Vince noticed her immediately. Amy, tense from a busy travel schedule and the pressure of constant public scrutiny, wore her worry visibly. Vince, ever the gentle soul, broke the ice with a disarming smile and a line she would never forget. "Hey, unknit that brow. It's going to be okay." It was simple, but it struck her. It wasn't flirtation. It was compassion. That evening, they performed together with seamless ease. Their voices blended naturally, as though they had been singing together their entire lives. It was supposed to be just one show, one song, one moment. But that moment planted something, subtle yet unmistakable. Over the next few years, they crossed paths again for more holiday concerts. Then Amy invited Vince to sing a duet on her upcoming album. The track was House of Love, and while the lyrics spoke of romance, the real story was unfolding between the lines. At the time, both Vince and Amy were married. Vince had been with Janice Oliver, of the country duo Sweethearts of the Rodeo, for over a decade, and together they had a daughter, Jenny. Amy was married to fellow Christian singer Gary Chapman. Both unions were quietly struggling under the surface. Vince had grown increasingly distant from Janice amid his demanding tour schedule and personal longing for deeper emotional connection. Amy, meanwhile, was enduring a rocky marriage marked by emotional strain and private battles no one outside their home could truly understand. Despite the sparks between them, both Vince and Amy claimed their connection remained respectful. "We were two people trying to be faithful to the vows we had taken," Amy would later say. Still, their chemistry was obvious, even to those around them. Fans, critics, and tabloids began speculating. By the late 1990s, the rumors had intensified. Vince and Janice divorced in 1997. Amy and Gary separated 2 years later. The overlap in timing raised eyebrows, and the public narrative quickly hardened into one of scandal. The backlash was particularly harsh on Amy. As a Christian music icon, she had built a career on values that now seemed at odds with her personal life. Radio stations pulled her songs. Former fans wrote angry letters. For Vince, the judgment was quieter, but no less painful. "What hurt the most," he later confessed, "was that people assumed the worst of us. And it wasn't true. We weren't reckless. We were human." After years of carefully navigating their public and private realities, Vince and Amy finally married in March 2000. The ceremony was held at his home just outside of Nashville, with about 100 close friends and family members gathered under the early spring sky. It was intimate, meaningful, and deeply emotional. Amy wore a simple white dress, and Vince stood beside her, not as a country star, not as a symbol of controversy, but as a man who had waited quietly and faithfully for the right moment. Standing tall, joining the Eagles and facing the backlash. When Glenn Frey passed away in January 2016, the world mourned, not just the man, but what his absence represented. Frey wasn't simply a co-founder of the Eagles. He was a creative anchor, a voice, and a presence that had defined the band's essence since 1971. Don Henley made it clear, "I don't see how we could go out and play without the guy who started the band." For a moment, it felt like that chapter in music history had definitively closed. But grief, as it often does, paved the way for something unexpected. What fans didn't know at the time was that Vince Gill had long admired the Eagles, not just as a listener, but as a fellow musician walking a parallel path. During the Eagles' original breakup in the 1980s, Vince and Glenn Frey had actually shared the same manager, Larry Fitzgerald, a connection that gave Gill an inside view into the band's inner workings, long before any collaboration was considered. Over the years, Vince had performed Eagles songs in tribute concerts and admired their songwriting craftsmanship, even covering "I Can't Tell You Why" in live shows. So when Irving Azoff, the band's legendary manager, reached out with a quiet invitation, it wasn't a shock to those who knew the deeper ties. Vince didn't hesitate. "When do we leave?" he reportedly said, choosing not to overthink the weight of the legacy he was stepping into. But stepping in wasn't about imitation. It was about reverence. Vince knew the role wasn't about replacing Glenn Frey. No one could do that. It was about honoring the spirit of the music while blending in seamlessly, humbly, and respectfully. Alongside Glenn's own son, Deacon Frey, Vince prepared to join the band's new formation for the Classic West and Classic East shows in 2017, with their first performance set for Dodger Stadium. Rehearsals were intense and emotional. Vince spent weeks studying harmonies, instrumental transitions, and vocal phrasing to deliver the songs not in his style, but in the Eagles' voice. Tracks like Lion Eyes, Take It to the Limit, and Tequila Sunrise were carefully selected for his vocal tone, smooth, melodic, and hauntingly familiar. Still, when he finally took the stage with the band in Los Angeles, there was no telling how the audience would respond. The result was electric. The crowd of over 50,000 responded not with skepticism, but with tears and standing ovations. Vince wasn't trying to be Glenn Frey. He was simply singing the songs with all the tenderness, skill, and precision they deserved. Don Henley later said of Gill, "He knows how to be in a band." It was perhaps the highest compliment one could receive in a group built on unspoken chemistry and unyielding standards. Still, not everyone approved. Some diehard fans balked at the idea of a country singer infiltrating a rock institution. Critics debated whether the Eagles had turned into a tribute act. Vince, as always, chose not to engage with the noise. "I understand it, but for me, it's about honoring Glenn, honoring this music and keeping it alive for people who love it," he told Rolling Stone in a rare interview. Weathering the storm, illness, caregiving, and grace under pressure. In 2020, during a routine checkup, Vince's doctor suggested Amy Grant also get evaluated. That casual recommendation led to a life-altering discovery. Amy had a rare congenital heart defect, partial anomalous pulmonary venous return, PAPVR. She would need open-heart surgery, and she'd need it soon. The operation was a success, but recovery was long and difficult, complicated by the COVID-19 pandemic that kept Vince from her hospital room for days. When finally allowed to visit, he dropped everything to be by her side. "He was there holding me up, never letting me feel alone, Amy later said in People magazine. His steady love carried her through the healing process. But 2 years later, in July 2022, life struck again. Amy fell off her bike near a Nashville golf course, suffering a traumatic brain injury. She was unconscious for several minutes. Despite wearing a helmet, she faced a long road to recovery, impaired memory, balance issues, and lingering pain. Vince canceled 3 concerts immediately. "No stage matters more than seeing her well again," he said. Through it all, he became caregiver, cheerleader, and protector. His old song, When My Amy Prays, initially released years earlier, resurfaced as a personal anthem, a tribute to her faith, strength, and their unbreakable bond. These experiences didn't just test his love, they deepened it. Writing the truth, reinventing his music at 67. With decades in the industry and shelves full of awards, most artists would be content to coast. But Vince Gill remains restless. At 67, he's not writing to chart. He's writing to heal, to reflect, to remember. "I'm writing the best songs of my life now," he said in a 2023 interview. "But they're not the ones that will top the charts. They're the ones that matter." That ethos runs through Forever Changed, a haunting 2019 ballad inspired by a story of childhood abuse. With his signature high tenor, he narrates pain not his own, but intimately felt. "Music is how I help others feel less alone," he explained. The vulnerability of that song, and others like Worlds Apart and My Kind of Woman, My Kind of Man, proves his artistry has only deepened with time. Vince's songwriting today is rooted in observation, not judgment. He watches life unfold, its losses, its quiet joys, and translates those moments into music that speaks without shouting. He's turned down commercial shortcuts, embraced younger collaborators, and found joy in simply playing. He isn't chasing his past. He's writing his truth in the present. Through tragedy, redemption, reinvention, and devotion, Vince Gill has proven that silence doesn't mean avoidance, it can mean reflection. And when he finally chooses to speak, it's with a depth earned only through living. Which Vince Gill song has stayed with you the longest?